This president loves taking on the pundits, but that's hardly the usual fare for a State of the Union address. After spending much of the speech on a wish list of tax and spending programs, Obama called for both parties to cooperate with a not-so-veiled shot at the phony stories that he sees as permeating the coverage of Washington.
A better politics is one where we debate without demonizing each other, where we talk issues and values and principles and facts rather than gotcha moments or trivial gaffes or fake controversies that have nothing to do with people's daily lives.
While some commentators praised the speech, many said it seemed divorced from reality.
That's why I would say it's highly partisan. It's basically saying, here, I'm Santa Claus. I'm going to give you all these wonderful presents. And mean old Scrooge is going to take them away from you.
But when he says, you are not for my approach, he is saying that you are, in a sense, evil. And then he decries polarization.
I mean, he made absolutely no sort of acknowledgement that all of the proposals he was suggesting have absolutely zero chance of passing.
Joining us now to examine the coverage, Lauren Ashburn, a contributor at The Hill, Jonah Goldberg, editor-at-large at National Review, and Joe Trippi, former campaign manager for Howard Dean. Both are Fox News contributors. Lauren, the press treated this almost as a speech from make-believe land.
It was a speech from make-believe land. There's a less than a snowball's chance in hell that any of the things that he was talking about is ever going to be passed by a Republican-led Congress.
That's why there was so little analysis of the proposals themselves?
Afterward, and people love to talk about, well, was this the best speech he ever gave? What is Elizabeth Warren going to think about this? Not the actual merits of the proposals.
Jordan, many of the headlines were pretty upbeat. New York Times, Obama defiantly pushes his agenda. Broad vision for his last 2 years. Politico, Obama leading from the front again. So some people like the speech.
Yeah, look, Lauren may be right in the sense that it may have been the best speech he ever gave, but then again, he's been practicing it for 7 years because it's the exact same speech he's been giving time and time again.
That's not what I said.
I know, but
I didn't say it was the best
I'll
speech.
say that.
But
leave it to the Democrat.
I mean, whole swaths of it are recycled from 100 other speeches that he's given, and he even spent the climax of the speech was dedicated to quoting himself from 10 years ago.
So you're hurling a charge of self-plagiarism. Let me go to Trippi.
Not self-plagiarism, just boring, hackneyed, trite, and recycled dreck. But yeah, okay, that works too.
Don't hold back. All right, a lot of liberal pundits love the content of the speech, and the White House, I'm told, doesn't view free community college or minimum wage hike or sick leave as provocative partisan proposals, but you know, and I think the administration knows, that almost none of this is going to pass.
Well, but that's sort of the point, I think, of the speech. Yeah, it's to lay out an agenda. I mean, he was on the offensive. I mean, that's the thing I took from the whole speech. I mean, you can argue about good or bad, but he was clearly on the offensive. And what's going to happen? Some Republicans would say it was offensive, but the point I think is that it puts the Republicans on and even the way the media covered it, puts the Republicans on their back foot in terms of if they vote down all these things, everything that he wants to do, it's party of no again. I mean, it's just sort of.
But they won't have to vote him down. They won't even come up for a vote, right?
Well, the GOP does control both houses. What about President Obama taking on, as we saw a moment ago, the pundits, talking about trivial controversies in the media culture?
This is an attack dog president. When he doesn't like what people are saying about his potential policies, he is going to turn on the media. And by name, he's done that to Fox News several times, bringing up, well, Fox News says this and Fox News says that, as if he doesn't think of anything but Fox News.
At MSNBC, though, Chris Matthews responded to that passage in the speech and said, I think he made a mistake about cable television. There are a lot of people at our network especially, says Chris, who have hoped and shared his hope for ending racial division and blah, blah.
Oh, a lot of people at the network support the President Obama? What is that, breaking news?
All right, so let me turn now to, after the speech, all politicians come out and give their take on it. So Joe Biden came out. He was on a couple of different shows, and he was asked, are you going to run in 2016? And he said, he's looking at it. He hasn't closed the door. And then at this conservative cattle call in Iowa yesterday, Sarah Palin was there, and she told the Washington Post reporter she is seriously considering a run in 2016.
Yes.
All right, Joe cannot contain himself. All right, my question to you, Jonah Goldberg, how seriously should the media take that?
as seriously as they would take it. Look, if she decided to run, she would get considerable share of votes in places like Iowa, not so much in New Hampshire, probably do okay in South Carolina, if she had a good team and was well organized and actually taking it seriously. Look, I mean, Sarah Palin creates some of her own problems, to be sure, but she also is constantly underestimated from people. She has a huge following in a lot of quarters of the right, and if she's actually serious about it, it's up for the press to take it seriously.
The word there is if. Yeah.
Well, 2 words, Donald Trump. I mean, this is a woman.
He was also in Iowa.
Well, right, but this is a woman who I think just wants to make sure she's out there and in the public spotlight, not so much whether or not she'll actually
Donald Trump
run.
has a long record of clownishly pretending he's going to run for president, and people take him seriously, including a lot of people at this network, which drives me crazy. I think Donald Trump is a bane of humanity. But that said,
what did you put in Jonas Coffin?
That's not Sarah Palin's game. Sarah Palin hasn't done this over and over again.
But the other side of this is she's done nothing to make anybody. I mean, taken any action to actually look like she's really seriously about doing this, and the press didn't cover that piece of it.
And let's talk about her unfavorability ratings if she were to decide to do this. In a poll that was conducted last year, went around the governor and the Senate-elect in Alaska, the poll also considered whether or not, if she ran, what her chances would be of winning against Huckabee, against Rand Paul, against others. And no way in heck was she going to win.
Okay. I will take Sarah Palin.
I'm not the only person to be excited about her getting in the race. The media would be. That's why they're doing it. I mean, they would love to see, and I mean, across the board, they'd love to see her in the race.
I will take Sarah Palin seriously, not as a political figure, but as a potential presidential candidate, when she gives up her Fox News contributing contract, which is the same thing that Ben Carson did and that Mike Huckabee most recently did when they got serious. Just briefly, the reporters have to ask Joe Biden, hey, are you running? And does he have to say that because he wants to not be a lame duck, basically?
No, I mean, one, they have to ask him, but two, I think he still wants to run for president. I don't think he will end up doing it, but I think he wants to. I think he wants to try to keep that door open.
What vice president wouldn't?
Yeah, and the one thing that's hard for a lot of people to understand is that there's one person in the world who takes Joe Biden really, really seriously, and maybe there is only one person, and it's Joe Biden.
Well, the situation would be very different if Hillary Clinton were not up by 85 points in the pre-primary polls. All right, there was news this week on Ferguson. Obviously, this was a huge story last year. And New York Times reporting the Justice Department, this was the lead story on the front page of the Times, Justice Department lawyers will recommend no civil rights charges be brought against Officer Darrell Wilson in the killing of Michael Brown. The coverage was kind of spotty. Why is that?
The coverage of the actual New York Times story. I actually, a lot of people picked it up. Reuters picked it up. A lot of other networks did. But my problem with that piece is law enforcement officials said that there were anonymous sources that were used as the only basis for fact on this.
So you're saying that you have a problem with how solid the Times report was, or did that make it more difficult for other news organizations that didn't have the sources telling them that to treat it as almost a fait accompli?
Well, CBS did have its own sources on this, and they actually reported a little bit more than the New York Times did. And so there was another organization that was able to say that there were 200 pieces of evidence that were examined.
CBS Evening News was the lead story after the Times reported it. ABC World News gave it a couple sentences. NBC Nightly News didn't touch it. So do you think some of the press are playing this down, or is it more that the story is kind of fluid at this point?
Oh, well, I think they're probably disappointed. I think at the same time...
Oh, wait, disappointed. So you're saying the press is rooting for federal civil rights charges against Darrell Wilson?
Look, I mean, I think it is beyond ridiculous to say that the press wasn't overwhelmingly on one side of the narrative going back to the early days of the Ferguson
Even after
story.
Additional information came out about Michael Brown attacking...
Sure, I mean, the facts have required them to claw back certain bits of it, but just the general enthusiasm about being on one side of the story, I think, is obvious. And at the same time, I think this has probably been leaked by the Justice Department to lessen the blow of the disappointment of the Sharpton crowd, of the MSNBC crowd, because this is very embarrassing the way Holder went in, guns a-blazing, in the early days of Ferguson, and they've got to let the air out of this bubble as best they can.
When the announcement comes out, it's treated as old news. But this wasn't a huge surprise, Joe. Very few people expected federal civil rights charges against Darrell Wilson because the standard is you have to prove that he willfully intended to violate Michael Brown's civil rights and knowing that it was wrong.
But that's part of, I think Joan is right about this, sort of the small leak that's totally been going out of the story from the beginning, including that the level of what you need to do to charge this isn't there. The Justice Department leaking it now. And also, I think that's why some of the media coverage has been so limited, because you don't have until there's a definitive ruling and it actually happens, then we'll see whether that happens or not.
My problem is, again, I'll say it again, with the anonymous sources angle of this, because everybody in Washington, you're not anybody until you've been an anonymous source, a military official, a law enforcement official.
But that doesn't mean the story's untrue.
It doesn't mean the story's untrue, but why do this before the report is actually final and out? Why play the game is my point.
Right. Well, that's maybe one of the reasons the coverage is spotty. And also, you guys have a good point, which is if this holds up and this is announced, it will seem like, well, we already had that.